Hey everybody, it's nice to have you here with me today. It's our first official day of our book club. We'll be reading, fourth grade is reading The Sign of the Beaver. It's a Newbery Honor book. I think I told you last time when Mrs. Smith and I did the intro together that this book, while it's interesting, I find it's a little bit challenging to read alone. So that's why I'm really excited to be able to read it with you and just kind of talk about some things that happen in it. There's a lot of challenging vocabulary words, just the circumstances of what happens. It's a historical fiction book. So everything in here could have really happened. It didn't really, but it could have. So we're going to be reading this today. It is, I think it's 25 chapters long. We'll be doing a chapter or two on most days. Here's the way this will work. So on most days we will read a chapter or two together, and then you will be doing a chapter, just writing a sentence or two, summarizing the chapter, giving the main idea of the chapter and drawing a picture to go with it. And that's going to be the gist of most of our days. It's a little different than we would have done if we were together in the classroom. This is what I had planned to do, the book club, anyway, after spring break. So I'm thankful Mrs. Smith got me set up with YouTube so that I could read this with you guys, because I really wanted to be able to do that. It's just our lessons are going to be maybe a little bit different than they would have been if we were together in the classroom. But it is what it is, so it's the next best thing. The fun thing about this is I don't think you'll find any of the work like majorly challenging. It's just kind of a fun, relaxing reading time. Take your shoes off if you want to, get comfy. I hope you were able to get a copy of the book. It's really important that you follow the words as we read. You know, I always tell you that. Even if you're listening to a book on Audible, very important to look at the words also, because that just helps you comprehend what you're reading and learn a lot of new vocabulary that way. Okay? So we're going to begin with chapter 1. It begins on page 1, so if you'll get there. So it's called The Sign of the Beaver. The author is Elizabeth George Spear. All right, chapter 1. Matt stood at the edge of the clearing for some time after his father had gone out of sight among the trees. There was just a chance that his father might turn back, that perhaps he had forgotten something or had some last word of advice. This was one time Matt reckoned he wouldn't mind the advice, no matter how many times he had heard it before. But finally, he had to admit that this was not going to happen. His father had really gone. He was alone, with miles of wilderness stretching on every side. Now, you know, wilderness just meaning that there's nothing around him. Nothing. All he sees is grass and trees. No people, no neighbors, no store, nothing. He turned and looked back at the log house. It was a fair house, he thought. His mother would have no cause to be ashamed of it. He had helped to build every inch of it. He had helped to cut down the spruce trees and haul the logs and square and notch them. Now, what that means, if you have Lincoln logs at home, you know how they have the little notches out of them so that they can fit together? That's kind of like a log cabin would be, okay? That's how they made Lincoln logs that same way. So they cut a little notch in them so they'd fit together. And he helped to do that with his father. He had stood at one end of every log and raised it, one on top of the other, fitting the notched ends together as snugly as though they had grown that way. He had climbed the roof to fasten down the cedar splints with long poles and dragged up pine boughs to cover them. Behind the cabin were the mounds of corn he had helped to plant, the green blades already shooting up, and the pumpkin vines just showing between the stumps of trees. Now let me pause for just a minute. I forgot to go over the vocab word, sorry. Our first word is bough. They talk about, you know, the baby song, rock-a-bye baby in the treetop, when the wind blows the cradle will rock, when the bough breaks the cradle will fall, and down will come baby cradle and all. The bough is a tree branch, okay? Let me just pop over these. There's notch. I just told you about notch with the like in the Lincoln logs where you just kind of cut out a little part of it. Oiled paper, when that comes up in the story, they used oiled paper instead, like they couldn't get glass easily for a window, and so they would put the oiled paper up over the window so that when the sun was up, it could shine in a little bit through this window instead of just having a huge opening. Glass wasn't readily available then, so oiled paper is what they would use until they were able to get something else. Over here we've got the word blunderbuss. That's a type of rifle. Okay, we'll read it in here. He's not crazy about the blunderbuss, but we'll get to that. Rueful means kind of sympathetic or sorrowful. And then Johnny Cake, now if you really want to get into the story, Johnny Cake is kind of like a pancake. Okay, so maybe you could convince Mom and Dad to make you some pancakes so you can kind of be a part of this sign of the beaver thing. Okay, that'd be fun. All right, page 2. If only it were not so quiet. Now think, he's out in the middle of nowhere in a cabin he and his father built together. His father has just left. Okay, so he's with no one. There's nobody anywhere near. If it only weren't so quiet. He had been alone before. His father had often gone into the forest to hunt for hours on end. Even when he was there, he was not much of a talker. Sometimes they had worked side by side through a whole morning without his speaking a single word. But this silence was different. It coiled around Matt and reached into his stomach to settle there in a hard knot. So he's a little bit uncomfortable. He knew it was high time his father was starting back. This was part of the plan that the family had worked out together in the long winter of 1768, sitting by lamplight around the pine table back in Massachusetts. His father had spread out the surveyor's map and traced the boundaries of the land he had purchased in Maine territory. They would be the first settlers in a new township. So they're first ones in this new town that they're going to be building up. 1768, okay, so this was way back at the beginning of our country. In the spring, when the ice melted, Matt and his father would travel north. They're describing their plan. Okay, this is the plan. He's thinking back a little bit. They would take passage on a ship to the settlement at the mouth of the Penobscot River. There, they would find some man with a boat to take them up the river and then on up a smaller river that branched off from it, many days' distance from the settlement. Finally, they would strike out on foot into the forest and claim their own plot of land. They would clear a patch of ground, build a cabin, and plant some corn. In the summer, his father would go back to Massachusetts to fetch his mother and sister and the new baby, who would be born while they were gone. Matt would stay behind and guard the cabin and the corn patch. Now, let me just recap here. Okay, so Matt and his father have gone to Maine. They're like the first settlers in this area, and they build a cabin that's going to be used as their family cabin. Now, back home in Massachusetts is Matt's mother and his little sister, and his mother's also expecting another baby. Okay, so Matt and his father have gone to get this cabin built, and then when Matt's father leaves to go back and get the mom and the little sister and the new baby, Matt stays all by himself. Now, we haven't said how old he was yet, so hang in there because it's going to tell us, but that makes me a little scared as a mom, thinking how old he is for sure. But just think, no matter what age you would be, being out in that cabin all by yourself in the wilderness creeps. That's kind of scary. It hadn't been quite so easy as it had sounded back in their house in Quincy. Matt had had to get used to going to sleep at night with every muscle in his body aching. But the log house was finished. It had only one room. Before winter, they would add a loft for him and his sister to sleep in. Inside, there were shelves along one wall and a sturdy puncheon table with 2 stools. One of these days, his father promised he would cut out a window and fasten oiled paper to let in the light. So they don't have that window yet. It's just all dark in there. Someday the paper would be replaced with real glass. Against the wall was a chimney of smaller logs, daubed and lined with clay from the creek. This too was a temporary structure. Over and over his father had warned Matt that it wasn't as safe as a stone chimney and that he had to watch out for flying sparks because they could start a fire if sparks were flying out of the fireplace. He needn't fear. After all the work of building this house, Matt wasn't going to let it burn down about his ears. 6 weeks, his father had said that morning. Maybe 7. Hard to reckon exactly. With your ma and sister, we'll have slow going, especially with the new little one. So his dad's saying, I'm going back to get your mother and little sister and baby. I'll be back with them in 6 weeks, maybe 7 weeks. Now remember, they don't have a phone. They can call and say, I'm running a little behind, Matt, or we're ahead of schedule. That he can't communicate with him. They don't even have mail there because he's in the middle of nowhere. Okay, so his dad's just assuring him 6 weeks. You may lose track of the weeks, he added. Easy thing to do when you're alone. Might be well to make notches on a stick. 7 notches to a stick. When you get to the 7th stick, you can start looking for us. That's a silly thing to do, Matt thought, as though he couldn't count the weeks for himself. But he wouldn't argue about it. Now, I meant to bring sticks to show you with notches in them, but he's saying if you get 7 sticks, and in each stick you notch out, like with a little pocket knife or something, notch out each day, a notch for each day. So on each stick you would have 7 notches. Each stick would equal 1 week because there's 7 days in a week. And his pa is saying it's important to do that because when you're out here alone, you're going to lose track of time. And Matt's kind of thinking, that's silly, Dad. I can keep track of time. But he's encouraged him. So Dad said 7 sticks, 7 notches in each stick. You know how many days that is? 7 notches and 7 sticks. How many days is that? 7 times 7. You're right, 49. 49 days. Pa said, we should totally be back by then. Okay, he said maybe even only 6 weeks. Then his father reached up to a chink in the log wall and took down the battered tin box that held his watch and his compass and a few silver coins. He took out the big silver watch. Every time you cut a notch, he said, remember to wind this up at the same time. Are you all following the words with me? Okay, what's our next word? Matt, that's right. Matt took the watch in his hand as gently as if it were a bird's egg. You aim to leave it, Pa? He asked. It belonged to your grandpa, would have belonged to you anyhow sooner or later. Might as well be now. You mean it's mine? Aye, it's yourn. Be kind of company hearing it tick. The lump in Matt's throat felt as big as the watch. This was the first thing his father had ever possessed. I'll take care of it, he managed finally. Aye, I knowed you would. Mind you don't wind it up too tight. Then just before he left, his father had given him a second gift. Thinking of it, Matt walked back into the cabin and looked up at his father's rifle, hanging on 2 pegs over the door. I'll take your old blunderbuss with me, his father had said. This one's aims truer, but mind you, don't go banging away at everything that moves. Wait till you're dead sure. There's plenty of powder if you don't waste it. It was the first sign he had given that he felt uneasy about leaving Matt here alone. Matt wished now that he could have said something to reassure his father instead of standing there tongue-tied. But if he had the chance again, he knew he wouldn't do any better. They just weren't a family to put things into words. He reached up and took down the rifle. It was lighter than his old matchlock, the one his father had carried away with him in exchange. This was a fine piece, the walnut stock as smooth and shining as his mother's silk dress. It was a mite long, but it had a good balance. With this gun, he wouldn't need to waste powder, so it wouldn't hurt to take 1 shot right now, just to try the feel of it. So Matt's rifle wasn't quite as good as this one his father left him, okay? But it's different. So you know how even if something isn't as good, if you have something else, if it's different, it takes a little bit of time to learn how to use it well or to get comfortable with it. He knew his father always kept that rifle as clean as a new polished spoon, but because he enjoyed handling it, Matt poked about in the touch hole with the metal pick. From the powder horn, he shook a little of the black powder into the pan. Then he took 1 lead bullet out of the pouch, wrapped it in a patch of cloth, and rammed it into the barrel. As he worked, he whistled loudly into the stillness. It made the knot in his stomach loosen a little. As he stepped into the woods, a blue jay screeched a warning. so it was some time before he spotted anything to shoot at. Presently he saw a red squirrel hunched on a branch. With its tail curled up behind its ears, he lifted the rifle and sighted along the barrel, minding his father's advice and waiting till he was dead sure. The clean feel of the shot delighted him. It didn't set him back on his heels like his old matchlock being a type of gun. Still, he hadn't quite got the knack of it. He caught the flick of a tail as the squirrel scampered to an upper branch. I could do better with my own gun, he thought. This rifle of his father's was going to take some getting used to, just like anything new takes some getting used to. Ruefully means kind of sorrowfully, Ruefully, he trudged back to the cabin. For his noon meal, he sat munching a bit of the Johnny cake his father had baked that morning. Already he was beginning to realize that time was going to move slowly. A whole afternoon to go before he could cut that first notch. 7 sticks. That would be August. He would have a birthday before August. He supposed his father had forgotten that with so many things on his mind. By the time his family got there, he would be 13 years old. And that's the end of chapter 1. So he's only 12 years old. That's, if any of you know any 7th graders, 6th, 7th grade, about 12 years old, those kids are. So somebody, if you have brothers or sisters that age, or cousins or friends, that's, even though they're older than you, that's young. I mean, he is being left alone in the wilderness all by himself to fend for himself. And his father has left him there so he can protect the cabin. If somebody didn't stay with the cabin, someone else would move into it. Things were just different back then with the way they handled property, okay? So he's all by himself in the wilderness, feeling a little bit uneasy. Right now the days seem to be going slowly. He's, waiting. He thinking, I have a whole nother half day to wait until I can put a notch in the stick to make one day go by. So I, if it were me, would be terribly uneasy. Like every sound I heard would freak me out. It's just a little bit unnerving, I think. Okay, so now have you made pictures in your mind about maybe what Matt looks like, what the cabin looks like? I'm guessing, now I don't really know, but I'm thinking the cabin would maybe be like half the size of this classroom, if they were lucky. I mean, it was small. So I'm thinking half the size of this classroom, like maybe the size of your bedroom or so. Very small, but his whole family's going to be living in there. And he's just all by himself in the wilderness. So think about what might happen, what's going to happen with him. Okay, so your assignment for this day, you're going to be writing, I normally would have copies to give you. We were going to, keep track of all the characters and the chapter summary and stuff, but we're just going to kind of makeshift it because this is a little bit different than normal. But just a piece of filler paper is fine. It already has the holes in it. Now let me warn you, I'm going to be collecting these at some point. I'm not exactly sure when, but I will be getting them. That's one of the ways I'm taking a grade on this unit, okay? But on the first one, I want you to write the title, Sign of the Beaver. I should have underlined that. I forgot to underline it. And then I'm going to put chapter 1. Now, you're not going to have to write Sign of the Beaver every time you get to a new page. You can just write it on the first page. But for each chapter, pretty much each chapter, there might be a couple that I'll let you combine. And I'll let you know if I want you to do that. But this one's just going to have chapter 1 on it. And what I wrote down at the bottom, down at the bottom, you'll be writing a sentence or two summarizing or giving the main idea of the first chapter, okay? So this says, Matt and his father build a cabin in Maine. Or you might want to say built a cabin in Maine. Matt's father leaves him alone to go get the rest of the family in Massachusetts. And then once you've written that neatly, I don't care if you do it in cursive or print, you can choose, but I want it neat, okay? Form your letters carefully, space between your words, make sure you capitalize what needs to be capitalized, use correct punctuation. I want all of that done carefully. Then you're going to illustrate it, okay? So get a pencil to do a little sketch with, and then you can choose. I'm not going to say you have to color it in. If you think it would look better colored in, then please do it. I feel like it maybe would look better colored in. So then, but use marker to outline, little stuff with marker, but if it's big things, I want you to use crayon or colored pencil, okay? And you might, I think I suggest getting a folder to keep these in. If you can get one that has clips in it, if you all have one at home, you could just clip them in. and that would be awesome. And you'll get the whole thing back when it's all over, but that would be kind of a great way to organize it all. Okay, so this, I don't want you to lose them. I'd hate for you to have to do 26 of these over again. And for heaven's sakes, please put your name on it. Okay, good night. Okay, so that's your, we've done our chapter 1. That's your time with me today. Now your assignment is this, and that's all it is for reading. And most of your days with this book club will be like this, okay? It'll be fun. It's kind of, aren't you excited about it? It's kind of neat, isn't it, to just think about Matt out there in the wilderness. What's going to happen? What's going on? Let me tell you this. If you read ahead, that's okay. I'm okay with you reading ahead, but please don't tell anybody else what happens. All right, if you find out what happens, mum's the word. And when we meet again to read chapter 2, I still want you following with me. Even if you've already read it, I want you following with me, just so you can hear my voice, reading it the way it's supposed to be read, pronouncing the words, hopefully, the way they're supposed to be pronounced, as long as I'm doing them correctly. But it's okay to read ahead, but still, when we come back together, I want you with me. Okay? All right, it's not bad. It'd be better if we were together, but it's all right. We'll adjust. Okay, I'll see you again next time for chapter 2. Bye, guys. Be good. Be good for your moms and dads. Okay? Make life easy for them. Bye-bye.